Okay, so I'm going to be showing you how to make this kaleidoscope garden using an online program called, a web-based program called Photopea or Photopea. Um, First thing we're going to do is we're going to go to www.photopea.com, and once we are in there, we're going to do File, New. We're going to hit screen. So there's social, print, photo, screen, mobile ads. We're going to go to screen, and then we're going to go to full HD. And this is because we'll be probably using this as a setting or backdrop for an animation at some point. So we want to do a full HD that's 1920 by 1080 pixels, which is the proportion of a HD YouTube video. And we're going to hit create, and there's our new document. We're now going to add a new layer. So up at the top, layer, new layer. Photopea is almost exactly like Photoshop. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set our foreground and background colors. So I'm going to pick some very sort of bright, festive colors here. I'll pick a nice red for my foreground color. Now I'm going to go to my brush tool, and I'm going to change the size, and you can also change the hardness of the brush. So right now I have it at all the way 100% hardness, and sort of a medium-sized brush. I'm going to just scribble scrabble on here, and then I'm going to get another bright warm color, and I'll put that next to it, and then another bright warm color, and I'll put it next to that. So now the next thing I want to do is I want to use the smear tool. Now you can find the smear tool hidden underneath the blur tool. Like Photoshop, Photopea has many hidden tools, and the way you find them is you go to a tool, and in the bottom right hand corner you're going to see a little triangle. If you click on that, you will find other similar tools. So I'm going to switch from the blur tool to the smudge tool. And I'm gonna, then the smudge tool, you can actually also change the size and the hardness just like any other brush. So I'm gonna change the hardness, and I'll also change the size, and I'm going to now smudge these colors together. So it's just like it's wet paint, and I'm smearing it with my finger. So I'm taking my smear tool, and I am smearing my image. So let's see. Now I'm going to add some more color to it. Let's see. Why don't I add like some pink to it? I'll go back to my brush tool. And then I'm going to go back to my smear tool and see how that looks. All right, so now I've got this very abstract sort of smudgy design. I'm now going to go to filter, and I'm going to go to distort, and I'm going to go to kaleidoscope. So you can control how many mirrors and how many angles your kaleidoscope design has. And you can see that we've got a lot of different choices here. So I'm actually going to X this out, and I'm going to make my design smaller. So I'm going to do edit, transform, scale, and I'm actually going to just make my design a little bit smaller, hit the check mark, and then I'm going to do, again, filter, distort, kaleidoscope. And so my design will be a little bit smaller. Now what you don't want is, you see how it's being cropped off here? You don't want that. So That will limit the number of angles and the number of mirrors and such in your design, because you do not want it to be partly cropped off. So let's see. I'm going to edit, transform, scale again, and I'm going to make it a little smaller in the hopes that it maybe doesn't get as cropped. Okay, so let me now do filter again, distort, kaleidoscope. So you see I can't go all the way out here. Here we go. Okay, so we have this nice design here, and I'm going to play around with a little more. I'm going to now do edit, transform, scale, and I can make it larger. And now I'm going to just right click, and I'm going to click on blending options, and you can do a lot of interesting things to this. First, I'm going to click bevel and emboss, and I'm going to add texture to it. And you see how there's this nice texture, this sort of beveled texture. I'm going to add a drop shadow, and I'm also going to add an inner shadow. So you can experiment with these, but these are the ones that I find the most interesting because they give it a sort of a 3D look. So that's my first order of business. I have my first layer here. I'm going to add a new layer. And in this new layer, I'm going to take some totally different colors. Let's take a blue. And I'm going to now go back to my brush tool and scribble again. So now I'm going to take a totally different blue. And I can actually change my brush. I can change the hardness of my brush. So I'll make it real fuzzy. And I'll add a sort of a fuzzy blue here. And again, I'm going to use my smear tool. And you can actually change the hardness and size. So I'm going to do some funny, weird things here. Blend it around and get some bizarre, abstract sort of designs. And now, again, I'm going to do filter, distort, and kaleidoscope. Now we're getting some beautiful designs, but you can see it's too big. So I'm going to just X this out, and I'm going to do image. Edit, transform, scale again, and make it a lot smaller. And now let's see what happens. Maybe I'll move it closer to the middle. All right, now we'll do filter again, distort, and kaleidoscope, and let's see what happens. Okay, I think that's a little bit more of a manageable size. Okay, and I see a very pretty design here. It's not cropped at the edges. And now right click, blending options. Let's give it the drop shadow. And that doesn't look quite as good. Let's try the inner shadow. That's kind of interesting. And let's do the bevel and emboss with the texture. That looks nice. let's see what happens with some of these other. Oh, that's interesting. Pattern overlay. Outer glow. No, not much. All right, so it looks like the inner shadow is nice. I'm going to hit OK. I'll do edit, transform, scale now, get it to the size I want. And now I'll hit the check mark. And let's go to blending options again, and let's see if a drop shadow looks better now. Now I'm not really loving the drop shadow. Let's see. Okay, it looks like it's pretty much nice the way it is. So I'm going to now make another layer. Layer, new layer. And in this case, I'm going to use my ellipse select tool, and I'm going to make a circle. And in this circle, I'm going to, let's see, I'll get some yellow as my background color, and I'll get some red as my foreground color. And now I'm going to use the gradient tool, and within this circle, I'm going to pull out a gradient. Okay, that's a lot of fun. And now I'm going to make another circle inside it. And in that circle, I will take two totally different colors. Let's see, like kind of a nice fuchsia. And then for my background color, let's do a really nice purple. So I got these two colors, and let's pull out a gradient. Very nice. Okay, so now select, deselect. And now let's see what happens. I'm going to try using my smudge tool again. And now let's see if we can use our filter, distort, and kaleidoscope. Okay, so that's pretty. I'm going to hit OK. Right click, blending options. Okay, let's see what happens when I give it a drop shadow. Very nice. Let's see if I give it an inner shadow. Very nice. Let's see if I give it some texture. Very nice. Okay, so now I've got some really interesting shapes here. Very nice, pretty patterns. And now I think I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to go back to my background color. Now I'm going to take these two colors that are here, and maybe I'll make this one just a little lighter. Okay, that's pretty. And I'm going to do, again, a gradient, but in my background color. So now I've got this. Now you can really see how the drop shadow has a fun effect because it's now hitting the background. So I'm going to go back to this layer, and I'm going to go to blending options. And I think now I'll see what the drop shadow looks like with this. Okay, and now that actually looks nice. The drop shadow sitting on that pink background actually looks really cool. Okay, so I've got my drop shadows. I've got my other things going on, but I'm also going to try this. I'm going to go up to layer 3, which is this one. And I'm going to, again, go to blending options. And now, right now, the blending mode is normal. I'm going to try and do overlay, see how it looks. So overlay means that it's picking up the color of whatever's underneath it. So I like that. So I'm going to hit OK. And now watch what happens. I'm going to duplicate this layer. And you can see that the overlay is a little bit more opaque because they both have the overlay blending mode, but it's blending with the layer underneath and it's also blending with the background. So let's go back here to this layer. Let's go to blending options and let's change it back to normal. Okay. So what's happening is this one has the overlay blending mode and the other one underneath it has the normal blending mode. So this one is blending with that one. If you were to remove this layer, it would blend with the background colors. So it's kind of neat. This one's kind of almost transparent and it's blending with the one underneath it. So it gives it a fun effect. Now let's just go to this layer here and let's see what happens if I go to blending options and I go to blending modes. Okay, I'm going to try overlay. That looks kind of cool, but let's try some other ones. Let's try color burn. That's interesting. So you can try these different blending modes and see how they affect the shape. Now, the interesting thing about blending modes is they only work if something is underneath them because they're blending with the layer underneath it. They don't work if the background's just plain. So I'm going to hit OK, and I'm going to grab this one and I'm going to move it on top of this one. Well, let's see, I got to pull it to the top layer. Here we go. I'm going to move it on top of this one, and you're going to see how the blending modes interact with each other. Okay, but if I were to right click, go to blending options and change this to normal, and I were to move it on top of this, they would not interact with each other. It would be opaque. So that's kind of a fun thing. You can play around with blending modes. You can play around with backgrounds. You got a lot of fun stuff to play around with. Now, at this point, I can start really overlapping my different shapes because I'm trying to make almost like a garden. So you can see it almost looks like a bouquet of flowers. Now I'm going to go over, I started a few of these earlier today, and I'm going to grab some of this. I'll do select all, edit, copy, and I'll go back to the one that I've been working on, and I'll do edit, paste, and I'll add some more layers to this nice design. And you can see how nice the drop shadows look on these. So going to this one, I'm going to just pull it out. And you can see how nice the drop shadows look because it gives the whole thing a sort of a 3D feel. So I'm going to play around with this a little. And the other nice thing is to have these shapes in different layers so you can play around with overlapping them. Now, when you're done, there's a couple of things you need to do. Right now, this is called New Project. So what we want is we want to rename it. So if you just double click on the word new project, you can change it to flower garden. Okay. And then our next step is, now we have this flower garden. It's a Photoshop file with all the layers. We're now going to do save as PSD, which means Photoshop document, flower garden, and it's going to save. We'll save it to our downloads. Hit save, and then you would put it into Google Classroom. Now, each day you would need to re-download it to your device and then open it in Photopea and continue working on it. But when you finally hand it in, you're going to need a different type of file. You're going to do file, export as PNG, which is portable network graphic, and you're going to hand it in as a portable network graphic. So you hit save, and you can see it says flowergarden.png. You won't be able to edit the layers anymore. It's all going to be in the same layer, but it makes a very nice background for an animation. Now, that being said, I'm going to give you a few days to work on this. But when you're done at the end of each class period, you're going to save your Photoshop document with all the layers and put it into Google Classroom. The next day, you're going to re-download it, reopen it, continue working on it in Photopea. And when you're done with the project, you're going to do File, Export, Export as PNG, and you're going to put the PNG into Google Classroom. And that is the assignment. We're just making a kaleidoscope flower garden, and we're playing around with the filters, and we're also playing around with the blending modes, the drop shadows, the embossed texture, and other features.